Hi. So I came to Craigardan. The thing I said I was going to do here is that I was going to be reading and researching and exploring and writing about the inner work that we as white people are called to do to dismantle white supremacy inside of ourselves so that we can take anti-racist action in the world. And specifically what I wanted to be soaking in is questions of what's the soul got to do it with it? What's the spiritual aspect of white people doing our inner work to dismantle white supremacy inside of ourselves? And that's been really hard. I've spent a lot of time wrestling and feeling discombobulated and moments of clarity, but larger swaths of moments of feeling less clear than when I came in. And so I was able to find one thread that as I kept pulling it, it didn't just disappear or get tangled up in front of me. And so I wanted to read a little bit of what I wrote about that thread, and then I want to share a little bit about my process and experience since I've been here. What's love got to do with it? With racial justice, healing, and repair? Everything and nothing. Much has been said and made of love in the context of race relations, and much of it is bullshit. Variations on the theme of, can't we all just get along? Can't we forgive and forget? Can't we see past our differences? This distortion of love is cheap, preposterous, and dangerous. It is the type of love that centers white comfort and has nothing to do with racial justice, healing, and repair. In fact, this is not love at all. This is not what James Baldwin had in mind when he said, white people have quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves and each other. And when they have achieved this, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. So what is love? And how do we as white people learn to accept and love ourselves and each other? Bell Hooks, Black feminist social critic and ancestor, echoes and weaves the thinking of M. Scott Peck and Eric Fromm when she defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is an act of will, both an intention and an action. To truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, trust, as well as open and honest communication. As white people, we have not learned how to love in this way. While we are all born with the capacity to love, the skill of loving is taught. According to Hooks, we learn about love in childhood, and an overwhelming majority of us come from dysfunctional families in which we were taught we were not okay, where we were shamed, verbally and or physically abused, and emotionally neglected, even as we were also taught to believe that we were loved. Beyond our individual lived experiences inside of dysfunctional families, we have all been raised inside of a dysfunctional society, characterized and dominated by the interlocking oppressive systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. According to Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, white supremacy has so thoroughly programmed and policed white people as to who and how they could love, determining entire groups of people unworthy, that the entirety of our descended culture suffers from a severely atrophied relationship to the most animating, enlivening, equalizing force gifted to the human experience. Lillian Smith, white anti-racist social critic and ancestor, wrote that white supremacy tells us that love is good and people are important, and then forces us to deny love and to humiliate people. Not only were we not taught how to extend ourselves for the purpose of nurturing our own or another's spiritual growth, or how to mix the ingredients of true love, care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, trust, and open and honest communication, we were in fact taught to shame, abuse, neglect, deny, and humiliate ourselves and each other, and call it love. The pivot from a love learned at the hands of white supremacy, which has nothing to do with racial healing and actually bears no resemblance to love, is a pivot from feeling to action, from receiving to giving. According to Hooks, most of us have learned about love primarily in relation to good feelings, in the context of reward and punishment. When we are good, we are rewarded with receiving love, which feels like affection, care, and pleasure. When we are bad, we are punished, and love is withdrawn, which feels like rejection and shame. Whether we are rewarded or punished, we learn that love is a currency of good feelings that is either given or denied. When in fact, love is a verb, an act of will and intention. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility, again from Hooks. It is long since time for white people to set aside childish notions of love as a particular kind of good feeling which we receive for performing good behavior, and assume responsibility and accountability for learning how to act from love, in service of love, which is ultimately in service of racial healing, our future, and our humanity. So then, how do we as white people learn to truly love and accept ourselves and each other? To skillfully mix the ingredients of care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, trust, and honest, open communication. First, we must create the conditions for learning. We do this by addressing our shame, healing from the shame we were steeped in as children, and developing resilience to white racial shame, alongside building white anti-racist culture and community that is sane and loving. And so this is where I'm going to depart a little bit from what I've been thinking about and talk a little bit about what I've been experiencing. So yesterday morning I went down to the Al Sable River, and the message was very clear from the river. Fewer books, more relationships and experiences. This is where real learning and growth happen. These are the precursors for creativity and wise action. Fear of fucking up is holding you back from learning, growing, and creating. All relationships and experiences are risks. Be not afraid of failure. I've also visited John Brown's farm 3 times in the past week. I'm really moved by his life and his legacy and that land. And it stirred some big questions in me. What risks am I being called to take? What does love have to do with risk? Did John Brown love himself, other white people, Black people? How do we extend ourselves for the purpose of nurturing our own or another's spiritual growth? The abolition of slavery ended, or was driven from the glaring light of our day-to-day lives. The abolition of slavery ended this most unnatural arrangement that stunted white people's spiritual growth. According to Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, living in proximity to and partaking in the open market sale and degradation of human bodies required white people's compulsion toward compassion for other beings to be systematically uprooted and replaced with a widespread indifference. White people traded their humanity for privilege, and we continue to do so today. So the big, juicy question I've been sitting with after 3 visits to John Brown's farm is, were his violent actions, were the execution of pro-slavery settlers in Kansas who violently defended a system that physically harmed Black people and spiritually decimated white people, were John Brown's acts of violence acts of love? In order to keep taking bigger risks, I have to heal from and neutralize the shame that I am steeped in, both as someone shaped and conditioned by white supremacy and as an adult child of a dysfunctional family of origin. It is my shame, my deep terror of failure and of fucking up, that holds me back from taking risks. Loving myself and learning how to in community is part of how I neutralize shame's hold on me. Loving myself paves the way for taking greater risks. I don't know if John Brown loved himself or other white people. I don't know if he wrestled with shame or felt held back by it. I do believe that he extended himself for the purpose of nurturing his own and our collective spiritual growth. I do believe that his acts of violence were acts of love. Frederick Douglass wrote of Brown, though a white gentleman, he is in sympathy a black man, and is deeply interested in our cause as though his own soul had been pierced by the iron of slavery. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote of Brown, look at that new saint, than whom none purer or more brave was led by love of men into conflict and death. Thank you.
Nice.